Hey there, and welcome. Have you ever tried to budget for the future but felt like you were just kind of guessing? Well, today, we're going to dive into a brilliantly simple tool that helps take a lot of that guesswork out of forecasting your business costs. It's called the high-low method, and trust me, it's a fantastic first step for any manager who wants to get a real handle on their finances.
Well, hello there. I'm Gemini.
So what's our game plan? First, we'll talk about the problem we're trying to solve, these things called mixed costs. Then I'll walk you through the high-low method itself step by step. After that, we'll put it into practice with a hotel case study, weigh the pros and cons, and wrap up by asking a really important question. When is good enough actually the perfect solution?
Okay, first things first. Before we can appreciate the solution, we've got to understand the problem. So let's set the stage and look at the core challenge this whole method is designed to tackle. This right here is a huge challenge for basically any business. I mean, think about it. Your bill for raw materials goes up the more you produce, right? But your rent, that stays the same every single month. Trying to create a budget when you've got these different types of costs all jumbled together can be a real headache. And that is what we call a mixed cost. These are the tricky ones. They're not totally fixed like your rent, but they're not totally variable like materials either. They're a blend of both. Our job is to untangle them, and that's exactly where this tool comes into play. Okay, so now that we know the what, let's get to the how. We're going to look at the high-low method. It's a simple but, surprisingly powerful way to take those messy mixed costs and split them cleanly into their two parts, fixed and variable.
Think of it as a quick and easy way to get a snapshot of your cost structure. You don't need complicated programs or a degree in statistics. All it does is look at the two most extreme points in your past data, your highest activity level and your lowest, to figure out how your costs behave. It's built for speed, for when you need a pretty good estimate, like right now. And the process itself. It's beautifully simple. It really just breaks down into 4 easy steps. First, you find the highest and lowest points of activity. Second, use those 2 points to figure out the variable cost for each unit. Third, you calculate your total fixed cost. And finally, you wrap it all up in a neat little formula. That's it.
All right, theory's great, but this is where the rubber really meets the road. Let's walk through a real-world example to see exactly how this thing works. For the next few minutes, we're going to be cost consultants for a hotel.
So here's our assignment. The hotel manager needs to put together a budget for September. They're expecting about 3,000 guests. They've given us their data on guest numbers and total costs from the last few months, and they need us to build a model to predict what their costs will be.
Okay, here's a look at the data we're working with. You can see we've got the number of guests and the total costs for different months. Now remember step 1? Our first job is to just scan this list and find the month with the most guests and the month with the fewest guests. Now this is really important, so listen up. You have to anchor your analysis on the activity driver. In this case, it's the number of guests. You might be tempted to just look for the highest and lowest cost, but that's a classic mistake. The number of guests is what drives the cost of change, so that's what we have to focus on. Always. So, following that rule, we look at our data and boom, there's our high point. May was the busiest month with 4,545 guests, and the total cost that month was $371,225. Let's lock those two numbers in.
And now let's find the other extreme. The quietest month had just 1,000 guests, and the costs were $105,450. So now we've got them. Our high point and our low point. Those are the only 2 data points we're going to need for this whole thing.
Okay, on to step 2. Let's figure out the variable cost for guest. The formula is actually pretty straightforward. It's just the change in your costs divided by the change in your activity. So, we'll take the cost from our high point, subtract the cost from our low point, and divide all of that by the number of guests at the high point minus the guests at the low point. We run the numbers, and what do we get? $74.97. So what does that actually mean? It means for every single person who checks into this hotel, it costs the business about $75 in variable expenses. Things like extra cleaning, toiletries, water, electricity, you name it. That's a super powerful number to know.
We're almost done. Now that we know how much each guest costs on average, we can easily figure out the fixed costs. The baseline expenses the hotel has to pay every month no matter what, like salaries for full-time staff, insurance, that kind of thing.
And here's what's so cool about this. You can use either the high point or the low point to find the fixed cost, and you should get basically the same answer. So on the left, we take the total cost for May and subtract the total variable costs. On the right, we do the same thing for the slow month. And look at that. We land on almost the exact same number, around $30,480. That's our monthly fixed cost.
And now for the final step, the big reveal. We put it all together into our cost model. The total cost for any month is going to be our fixed cost of $30,480 plus our variable cost of $74.97 times the number of guests. With this powerful little formula, we can finally give the manager the forecast for September.
We just plug in the 3,000 guests they're expecting, and there's our prediction. The total cost is forecasted to be $255,390. We've just turned a bunch of historical data into a concrete, useful number that the manager can actually use for planning. Pretty cool, right?
So you know how to use the tool. It seems pretty handy, but a good analyst always asks, okay, when should I use this and when shouldn't I? We need to look at the trade-offs involved.
The biggest advantage, obviously, is that it's simple. It is fast, it's easy to do by hand, and you don't need any special software. But that simplicity is also its biggest weakness. Because it only uses 2 data points, it ignores all the other data in between. And if one of those 2 points happens to be a weird outlier, well, your whole result can get thrown off. It's a classic trade-off. You're giving up some precision to get an answer really, really quickly.
And that brings us to our final, and maybe the most important thought of this whole discussion.
This is the real question you have to ask yourself. Is the high-low method perfect? Nope, not even close. Are there more accurate methods out there, like regression analysis? For sure, but for a quick internal estimate, a first draft of a budget, or just to get a gut check on your cost structure, this method can be an incredibly valuable and efficient tool. The key is knowing its limits and deciding if a good enough answer right now is better than a perfect answer next week. And that, really, is the art behind the science of management.